Hello and welcome to today's Willem Institute live stream. Today we have Brian Mboya, and he'll be talking about the search for memory augmented architectures, biological lessons for computation. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Dugan. So the talk of today is the title says augmented, the search for memory augmented architecture, but the whole idea is the question of how computable memory is. And I've split the talk into 5 topics. So the first one is the evolution of memory research in neuroscience and psychology. And then I'll talk about more about the computability of memory using computational systems, and then the implication of AI and AGI, or memory in AI and AGI, then biological evolution, specifically Turing machines and cellular automata, and then the future of artificial intelligence that is introduced these new kind of models that are emerging in the system called Emergent Models. So great. So let's talk about like the history of memory in neuroscience, psychology, and as you can see, like a toy example of how the connection between 2 neurons is. In real life, the neurons are really like complex, and they are complex structures, and there's so many details represented in it. But this is like a shallow representation of a synaptic plasticity process, and then neuron A and neuron B, where there is the sort of an exchange of information between the neuron through the synapses, and the representation of a neurotransmitter going from one synapse to the other, right? So like this is like a more of what we want to think about, how neurons communicate information with each other, right? And then we also know that it's a network, right? So these neurons are not just 2 neurons communicating, but the 2 neurons are very interesting because of how they communicate. But if you have multiple, then you get a network of neurons, essentially neural networks, right? So the question is, what is going on between these 2 neurons, and how can that be represented computationally, right? So I'll jump through a few examples, like history and the evolution of memory, and starting with the localization debate, which essentially asks how localized is memory in the system or in the brain? Is it localized or is it distributed? By localized, it means like is there like a specific location in the brain that is responsible for memory, or is it distributed throughout the entire brain? And a very interesting researcher called Lashley contributed a lot of work in this debate of localization, and his work explored and mentioned that memory is actually distributed across the entire brain because there is mass action. So the mass action principle essentially says that every neuron in the brain contributes to how memory is represented, and the brain actually makes or recollects memory in its entirety, right? So the localization. So if you look at this, the localization just means that one section of the brain is responsible for memory, but then distribution is every neuron contributing to memories. So this is interesting because if it now begs the question: how can, like, because if it was localized, then you can just focus on one area, just like computers do. Like computers are more like they have a specific location where memory is external memory and addressing system, right? But the brain is different. The brain is distributed. So if you enter a specific memory, you have to like go through this process of reconstruction, which I'll talk about, and then invoke or get the memory you are looking for. So
Right. So
that
I
answers
guess
what, like how.
yeah, sorry. Hippocampus comes to mind, right? Like people say that the hippocampus is for memory or certain types of memory.
Yes.
But here it's like, okay, maybe it like these memory is stored throughout the brain.
Yes, so the idea is like I'll talk about the hippocampus as well, but the idea is uh, memory is stored throughout the brain. The hippocampus is more like uh, an encoder or a gateway throughout memory. So the memory passes through the hippocampus so that it's distributed throughout the brain. So I'll talk about the hippocampus in a moment, but yeah, that's essentially right. Right, and then so that was Lashley, and we go through the Penfield's experiments. So Penfield did a few experiments on electric stimulations on the brain, like how you can stimulate the brain through electrical mechanisms and see what the response or the body responds to those stimulations. And one finding he found that was that the attention or the focus we pay to the environment or the events in the environment are essentially recorded in the temporal lobe. So you focus on the environment events, and then the temporal lobe keeps a recording of that or of those events. And you can see that his findings were really influential to how like memory, computational memory, or the idea of reconstruction of memory rather than the replay of memory. So the memory is not like a replay event. You are just replaying events or memories that has been stored in the system, but it's a reconstruction. It's a construction. So the brain constructs memory based on like what kind of inputs or stimuli you put it you give the brain, right? So this was important, and it led to a few many ideas into how memory works. And from on the right, you can see that I've like given a representation of what actually goes on. It's not the actual thing, but you can see that you give a system an original event or anything that you can think about, and then the brain reconstruct when you're remembering. This idea of remembering, brain reconstructs the original event, and then you get a list of different inputs like false memory and guessed memory and actual memory. So the green is like the actual memory from the original one, and then you get the red one, which are false memory, but they are reconstructed from the original ones and also guessed ones. So this idea of memory reconstruction uh, um, gets you to a point where like you need to think about like how remembering works. Maybe remembering works this way, right? You get mostly you get false memory, and this is important because of how, like, if you think about how you remember during the day, like any day you remember things, right? You'll notice it's never actually the actual memory, right? It's not like the actual event from details to details. It's a reconstruction. It's a simulation of what the events were, right? So this is the idea of reconstruction of memory.
So
So
is it like a compressed a summarization of the event or the memory, the the
Yeah,
situation.
yeah,
And so like all these sensory data get stored and like associated, and then you have this compressed description of them. And then when you go back to look at that memory, you think about you call up that like description, and then from there you sort of your brain like reconstructs more or
yeah,
less the event.
yeah. That's true. That's true. So yeah, it's a compression mechanism. So it never like gets you the actual events, because if it did, then you will know that memory is not like a computational phenomena, right? Because computation never gets you the actual thing, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's right. Like it's a compression mechanism. And then I equate this construction of memory um, to computation. So memories are actively constructed by the brain and not passively replayed. And then we can look at also at like a shallow representation of what I think Penfield was talking about. So we have like visual, auditory, and other stuff of other stimuli or inputs going through the brain, and then we have a filter, attention, that filters this information. And before it filters, after it filters, it gets that to the temporal lobe, which records these inputs, and that recording essentially gets you the results of what the hippocampus will deal with. So the hippocampus, as you mentioned, is a sort of consolidates the memory. So if you get an input from the temporal lobe or from other areas, it gets that it consolidates that, for example. That's what happens when you're dreaming or you're sleeping. So the hippocampus is moving stuff from the short-term memory and getting those to the long-term memory. And so the Penfield stimulation, like you can see from the right, like it's like an electrical stimulation, but then the electrical never actually gets you the actual thing, but you get real frozen guessed memories. So that the idea of reconstruction is also displayed here.
What is the nature of his stimulation? Is it like specific neurons, or is it like some sort of region?
Yeah, it's a region, so it's not specific to neurons. So he was essentially searching for which area is responsible for memory, right? So it gets to specific regions of the brain. And then the other very important contribution to memory was the Hebb's structural theory of memory. And we see these a lot in the current systems of AI. So what he proposes are two things, structure. The first one is a 3D network of memory. I mean, the neural nets uh, uh, in short, and then the connection between those two neurons. So this theory enables the learning process to happen. So the connectivity of the neurons is important for the learning. So, and what we call Hebbian learning. Hebbian learning essentially is what enables systems to learn efficiently. For example, if you have a neuron A and a neuron B, if a neuron A fires, if they're too close to each other, neuron A and B, then that automatically leads to neuron B also firing, right? That's the firing process of neuron A and B leads to a Hebbian learning kind of phenomena. And then he quotes that when an action of cell A is near enough to excite a cell B, then and repeatedly fires cell B, then the growth process increases for cell A on firing cell B. So you can see that simulation right here. So if cell A presynaptic fires, if it's too close to cell B, then cell B will essentially fire again. And then you can see a strength the strength of that firing process strengthening as A fires. So this is essentially Hebbian learning, and it's an important concept in the current like it's a network, like, so it's an important concept in the current AI systems, which uses neural network.
Right. So
And
here is it like an engram? Is it so? It's like a network, a particular network or subset of the neurons, a collection of neurons firing together in a strong way to reproduce that memory, that particular set of connections. And so each connection in that network is like strengthened as a node to node connection.
Yes, that's true. So if you get if you get a specific input to the network, then there are specific cells with which fires together, right? If those two cells, not just two, but if those cells fire together, then they create this sort of, it's called an engram, like, and that engram is an encoding of their behavior or their way of learning, for example.
Uh-huh. And I wonder if that strengthening along that synapse is particular, because like a synapse has like a lot of different neurotransmitters that are like going across it, different types of signals, not just like a single scalar value, like like a neural net in these AI systems or something. It's modeled like everything has a scalar value and it goes through like a threshold, and then like it either like activates or it doesn't, or it outputs like a 0 or 1 or like some sort of like floating point number. So there's only one type of value, a scalar value, that's being transmitted across the synapse in those artificial neural nets. But in like in the brain, there's like all these chemicals involved, neurotransmitters.
Yeah, so the ions, and so the sodium potential and potassium ions, which are like the most ions that are used in the transmission between synapses and the two synapses. So like the transfer, as you mentioned, depends on the strengthening of what the input comes in, right? So if it's strong enough, then the signal will come through, it will pass through, right? If it's weak enough, then it gets blocked. It's a phenomena that it's a signal processing mechanism which blocks systems noises from passing through the system.
We have a question from live stream. Brad B is asking, is it the exact timing between neuron firing that determines whether the synapse is strengthened or weakened? Does this naturally drain or weaken over time if no firing is occurring for a while?
Yeah, so there's this phenomena called long-term potentiation. So if the more they fire together, the more they strengthen. But if they don't like fire together long enough, then the strength weakens, right? So
okay,
yeah,
So there's kind of a cool down period for these neurons sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, correct. Right.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
next slide. So next slide. It's the hippocampus system. And as you mentioned, so the hippocampus plays a huge role in memory. And one of the findings was that the hippocampus is an encoder in the gateway for memory. It's not like a storage. It's not a storage system for memory. And I think the most studied patient was this guy, HM. And his contribution was the findings that, so his hippocampus was distracted, and that led to like him not creating new memories, and that led to the understanding that memory is not like is not stored in the hippocampus. So the hippocampus plays a crucial role in creating memories and moving memories from short to long-term memories during sleep. So that was important, and we also learned that the hippocampus has a few other roles, like for example, if you think about how memories are stored and how the hippocampus, like it has few cells like the grid cells and place cells, and those are part of the way the distribution mechanisms uses these cells to distribute information from the hippocampus to all the other parts of the brain. So the grid cells are essentially what send information, special information. So you can see, like, you can look at you can think of each this grid as encoding different information um, for what the input was. So if you have like vision, touch, and smell, so the grid cells encodes different information, and then the activities of those sends spatial information to place cells. So you can think of place cells as encoding spatial information, like navigation information, and where to get from one place to another. And so there are some experiments which have been done on the navigations of systems in maze, like biological systems in maze, specifically rats. But yeah, so the goal or the work of the grid cells is to just encodes information that should be sent to the place cells, and then place cells keeps those information, which is then transmitted to all parts of the brain as a spatial map or a cognitive map. And you can see from the right that we have the contribution of John Hawkins, which was he studied mostly on animal learning, and he provided the idea that a hippocampus provides the rest of the brain with a cognitive map through the process of the grid cells and place cells. So this was an important discovery, because if you think about, for example, if you want to know if you want to predict the activity of a place cells, then you can use the grid cells activity. So for example, prediction can be made more easily by just looking at what the grid cells are doing. So if you write a system or an algorithm that can do the prediction of what the grid cells is doing, then you can essentially know what the place cells will be or will do. So this was another very important contribution, and it led to the understanding that this is not a hippocampus is not a storage site. It's like an engram. Yes, it's a storage site. It's not a storage per se, but it's more like an encoder or a
Okay,
pattern
so that's really interesting. I
formation.
mean, the grid cells, as I recall, are like for spatial navigation, especially for rats. They talk about like this neuron lights up anytime a rat moves to another like two-dimensional grid point, like on a hex grid, for instance. Um,
Yeah,
and so it's like a condensed way for the mind or for the brain to like keep track of their location in whatever like realm that they're
yeah.
navigating. So the
So
rats,
the
especially,
coordinates.
uh huh.
Yeah, so each coordinate in the grid cells presents a location of what happened, or a memory of what happened in that specific location.
Okay, so it's like over here is the food chamber kind of thing, or like, you know, for me, if I walked around my house with my eyes closed, I would really have to like concentrate on those grid cells and say like, okay, well the refrigerator's like a bunch of steps this way in this region, and then the living room's over here, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's like associating different types of memories to different places in this map. And so you're saying that this mechanism gets co-opted for memory in general in the hippocampus?
Yeah, so it plays a crucial part in memory consolidation. For example, if a rat wants to remember that this place was where I got shot, right? It has to like query place cells and the coordinates of the grid cells. You can use the coordinates of the grid cells to query the place cells, right? So you know that this part of the corner is where like I got shot. So like that's a memory encoding scheme.
Okay.
So like you can think about like if the brain has a map of the entire place or the entire thing that happened to the rat when it went through the maze, right? So it's a map, like cognitive map of the entire brain. So if it knows that if I go to this place, then there is a trigger that tells it that this is where I got shot, right? So I will avoid as much as possible that section of the area.
Mm-hmm. And conversely, like over here is the place where like there's food. That's good.
Yeah,
This
and
place is good. That
so
place is bad.
also, yeah, and then also the map also encodes other information too. So it's not just vision, touch, and smell and time. It also encodes what we call reward systems, so cognitive uh, inputs or stimuli like rewards. So if it's food, then knows that this is good. Like I want to go there more, right? So like it also encodes rewards.
Right. And rewards and penalties alike will like reinforce the particular those particular connections from the place cells from the grid cells, excuse me, to the place cells.
Yeah,
Hmm. Cool. And this is managed in the hippocampus.
yeah, this is specific to the hippocampus. And
Interesting.
yeah, so this suggests also that the map itself suggests that it's a distribution process. It's not like there's such one area that is all related to these things, that these events. It's a distributed process in the brain. So and the other point that I would like to mention is the hippocampus it's an indexing mechanism. It indexes the engrams. So you know that the engrams is a pattern of what neurons form, right? So it indexes that, and that is encoded in the map that is sent to the rest of the brain.
Yeah, yeah. So like the engram is like this activation pattern on a bunch of neurons, and there might be like a trigger set of neurons that you go press this button, and then like this thing will pop up.
Mhm.
You kind of load the
Yeah.
memory. Huh.
Yes.
Yeah, this drives with like I hear people talk about like a memory palace, like a mnemonic device
Yeah.
for like keeping track of all your like the things you want to remember. Sort of like imagine an actual like physical place where you go and you're like over here is like this corner and like you put in this memory and over here is like different. You
Yeah.
literally
So
assign them
also,
to like different places in some sort of mental map.
yeah, and yeah, it's interesting because Marvin Minsky also mentions this idea of so he calls the engram as K lines. K lines are like the knowledge lines for the for the for the system, right? So if you have this bunch of K lines, you can get specific information of memory using those K lines. So it's interesting to think about how that can be used in systems, the current system, to encode information.
You say K lines?
Yeah, K lines, knowledge lines.
Oh, I see. Okay. Hmm. I guess those are like particular associations between memories or something.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, some things of memory.
Interesting.
But yeah,
Cool.
but so the K lines is so he says the K lines are encoded in in the system. So remembering is a way of accessing those K lines. So you access K lines through the process of remembering. But I think what K line means here is just n-grams, right? So you have a list of n-grams, then you can just access those. It's a knowledge of n-grams. Okay, so we move on to the next. So the next is I'm just highlighting of the neural mechanisms of memory. And this idea, which is very interesting, is the action potential that you talked about, how like the molecule or the ions moving from one neuron to another through the synapses. So Hodgkin and Huxley talked about these phenomena where sets of neurons, for example, if you have a neuron membrane and information flowing through one neuron to another is essentially controlled by how what the ions or the concentration of sodium ions and potassium ion are, and so you see, depending on the concentration, then you see this wave-like potential. So this is the action of what the firing will do. Like so assuming that information is coming from the action of one neuron, then through the synapses, something happens. So the ions are released, sodium, potassium, then there is this phenomena called the action potential. It's important because think about, we talk about long-term potentiation. So this firing, so assuming there are two or there are more neurons connected to each other, then this firing process, like each neuron firing and leading to another neuron firing, then you get a strength. So like see, like on the left, that we have a before weakening. It's a weak signal or a weak connection. Then after some time, after the long-term potentiation happens, or long-term long-lasting firing, then you get a stronger connection between the two neurons. So this is it's very important for learning, especially Hebbian learning, and also other learnings too. I think it's very important. But the piece that I'm really curious about is this molecular switch. The idea that you can switch memory off. So there's this gene called this protein called CREB, camp response element binding, which essentially enables a system to switch on and off the gene called cyclic EMP gene, which allows the system to remember, or the organism to remember, decide to remember what it has learned. So if you want to forget what you have learned, then you just switch off the this gene, and then you will never remember that, right? So it's important because I think it relates to this idea of attention, right? So if you can control attention through the switching on and off of this gene, then you can know it's an efficient way of controlling attention. Like, I want to focus on this, so I just switch off the rest of the other stuff that come in. So I just focus on this thing that I want to remember. So it's important, and I think it's an area that I'm also interested in. And yeah, so to explore all this stuff, all this memory potential, action potential, and memory switch, then there are other things that have been proposed currently in the neuroscience field. So we have optogenetics, essentially allows you to see through neurons. So you see what is happening with neurons through light control neurons. And then another thing which is very interesting is dendritic spine. So the idea that you can, like, the Hebbian learning process leads to new dendrites forming or synapses forming. So you get new synapses forming or dendrites forming through the process of learning. And I think it's it's more related to maybe it's a control system or it's not, because if it just creates the learning creates synapses and dendrites, then it must be that it's a reward kind of work system, right? So you get rewarded by like creating more dendrites through the learning process. But yeah, it's an interesting area as well. And the other one is n-gram manipulation. You can delete an n-gram or add false memory. It's important to research so that you can decide, or you can know what is you can control how the n-gram behaves by just maybe deleting or adding, and maybe creating new n-grams which creates false memory. It's also important to that area.
Now, that's interesting.
But
So there's this Krebs protein, and that's involved in like you can activate it or deactivate it or do something with that mechanism to
so
turn
yeah,
memory creation on or off, or to
so the
turn specific memories on or off.
yes, so Krebs protein controls the gene. So it's a gene control system. It controls what the genes that is involved in memory, and this gene is called cyclic. The other name is mouthful, but it essentially controls what the organism should, if the organism wants to remember. So the gene that controls the remembering or not remembering is that the camp. And then Krebs just tells it, you should remember this or forget this.
Hmm. Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and the other area, which I think it's more like there's a controversial the controversy about the transfer of learning, but I think it's a very interesting, especially when you think about AI systems, or like the training process of AI systems. So if this could be true, or also cell generation. So I remember, Dugan, you shared this link, which was very interesting because it shares light on how transfer of learning can be used. So like you have a cellular automata that regenerates if you delete some section, like a leg of some animal, then it regenerates through this transfer of learning. So other cells have the knowledge of creating a limb, right? So that knowledge is used to regenerate the limb of you just create. And if you go to this link, you can play around with some simulations that has been done, like the growing of cellular automata using a few manipulation you can play around with. So yes, I think there's potential in transfer of learning, and especially in the current systems we are using. Like if a system has knowledge already, then there's no need to like train another system. Just transfer that knowledge to the other system.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
so
in that link, it was like the salamander or this lizard coming up as a cellular automata, two-dimensional like image, and it was like each cell had some sort of encoding of okay, if I'm contextually or part of a leg, then I keep growing that leg, or if I'm part of the neck, then I keep growing this neck, and
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really fascinating.
Yes. Right. And moving on. So now, okay, so we move on to the computational part. So what is going on, right? When remembering, is it a computational process, and or is it like something that is hard to understand? Like it's out of our own understanding. So yeah, you remember the signaling you talked about, like how what information comes in and what information should not come through, right? So there is this signal processing through nonlinear conditioning. So we have an input, a sensory input, which is just raw data from the environment, and then we have a function, transition function, which does the extraction of features. Like we want certain features to go through or not, right? So it's like a nonlinear transform way of extracting information. And then the conditional gating just allows what passes through, right? It's a cleaning process. This is like a high level, an abstract way of how systems clean information. So we have noises that come through, like noise, as I have represented. It's always coming through. Like noise is everywhere. It's always there. So, and we know that uh, through this process of encoding and filtering information, the noise is always like the weakest layer of noise is always blocked. It never goes through the output. So the strongest one is the one that is very open, and the medium one is partial, just few information after like conditional getting through context dependence allows information to partially to go through. And we have a like the last one, which is the clean signal. So this is where learning goes through. So after all this process, then learning uses the clean signal. So this is the signal that carries the information that we want, right? So we have information, and this whole process is multimodal, meaning that we have different sensory input coming through. We have vision, sound, touch, smell. All this is information from the environment, but how you filter those information is what is important, because that will lead to learning or unlearning. And this is like a way, like a shallow representation of an abstract representation of what goes on. And strong signals always pass through. Like those are like what the system pays attention to, right? The
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is
strong
like
signal.
attention, right? Because when you're attending to something, it's like you
Yeah.
have all this stuff going on. You're in this environment. You have all this sensory input. You know, you might be like walking through the forest, thinking about how nice the trees are and the sunshine, but then you see like off in the corner, like a tiger looking at you intently. You know, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it's like throw away everything else, concentrate, and focus your
Thanks.
attention,
Yeah.
and like that intense moment is sort of being burned in your memory at the same time.
Yes, true. And you can see here I've represented that exact phenomena. Like if you are attending to a such section of the area, then how memory is encoded is like that specific, the strong signal that you're attending to will be reproduced exactly the same way. Like the three dots, like they are the same in the attention way, and then they are the same in the memory way. But in real life, sometimes when you're remembering, it's never actually the same, but it's a representation of uh, that specific thing you are attending to. So go
Right,
like a
right.
few times.
It's
Yeah.
like yeah, it's this compressed representation. It's like you're remembering that okay, you're in this forest, there are all these trees around, all these ferns maybe, and then like there's this tiger there, and the tiger is looking at you, and then you go back to remember that. Like okay, I remember that the tiger and it had stripes. How many stripes? I don't remember, but like I see in my mind's eye, like this tiger with stripes, a certain number of stripes. Like these details are synthesized in the remembering
Yes.
process. They're not like actual hard details about it.
Yes. And
Mhm.
that's essentially what this architecture does. It's like an attention architecture. And so what we get from here is a signal and noise discrimination. Like we don't get noise in the system. We always get rid of noise. Then the conditional connections and distributed processing. So you can think about this system being in a certain area of that received information or recordings. For the temporal lobe records, or the cortex, the temporal cortex records information. So you can think about this system encoding that. Okay, so let's moving on to like what. So these are like the what the history looks like how what we learn, we are currently learning, and then what the future holds for computational memory. And what we've learned, the hippocampus is an encoder and a gateway. Memories are multimodal and contextual. Multimodal, like space, time, space, smell, light, and all that stuff that comes through the system. And then distributed networks, like the whole brain contributes to memory creation and memory distribution. And then transfer of land. So this is like I'm not sure about these, but I think it happens during Hebbian learning like process. But it's something that I think it's interesting to think about, like bi-directional learning, and if that could be encoded in the current systems of neural networks would be an interesting phenomena. And then so consolidation, we see this with ourselves. We consolidate memory through dreams and sleep. So when we are dreaming, kind of replaying a simulation of what we have been we have been storing in the brain. So the brain kind of like goes through all those process of simulating that to you. And the study of dreams is very interesting because like to reproduce like a dream-like phenomena is something complex, and how the brain does it, it's something like very bizarre and very strange, but it's a very interesting area to study. And
Yeah.
then now
Yeah, I mean,
what I think. Mhm.
on dreams, it seems like okay, so you go throughout your day, you have all these experiences, and then like all this data, sensory data that needs to be like parsed, and then like stored, compressed, and then stored. So like dreams are a form of like making a story. Like a story is like a compressed form of like eventual data or episodic data, or like you have these events, and then you want like a compressed logical like sequence that goes through. I think like a dream is sort of like taking what happened and then trying to like analyze it and form a story out of it, and then like a story is like a compressed form of like what happened, a single thread
Yeah,
of like understanding it. Um, and it
yeah,
has all these like emotional associations or whatever. You're like in this dream state, but it's like you're in this situation, and then this situation morphs to this other situation, and your dream, and then I guess that's interesting
but
to think
okay,
about.
so also the idea of um, inspiration, like people getting inspiration from dreams. It's interesting because the inspiration might just be like what the brain has been um, computing, like giving you an answer to the question you've been asking yourself. So it's very interesting. And yeah, so the cutting edge research that I think is very interesting, and most of these are being done. So molecular level false memory implantation. It's a way of like getting to putting false memory or changing n-grams, the state of n-grams, and seeing what the system does. It looks like that is what adaptive evolution seems to be, like change the system and see what sort of phenomena comes through, right? And then optogenetics, we know this is happening already. People are doing research and like using optogenetic tools or light controlled neurons. And neural pathway pre-programming, I think this is more like how neurons change in time. Like you can change the state of a neuron or the path of a neuron. I think it's still not really something that is being explored, but I think through memory implantation, you can do neural pathway reprogramming and get results from that. And then brain computer memory interfaces, some things have been done in BCI, and which is the interesting, which is more like micro or the cell level, is the predictability of memory. Can you predict? This is what dreams do, like predicting stuff, predicting what the system has been taking in. So this is also very interesting. And then we have like an outline of what the memory research has evolved to the current state. And yeah, so I can move on to, if there's no question here, I think I'll move on to the next interesting part, which is the implication of AI and how the current AI systems implements this concept of biological memory. And I'm just putting arrows to where I think represents what's happening, like the biological lessons and what transformer architecture, which is the famous architecture. And one of the the main concept around transformers is the idea of attention, of self-attention, which we've touched on how like systems attend to information. And distributed representation is really just how the information flows from one layer to another. It's like it's a distributed process. It's a parallel distributed process. So from move feed forward kind of way representing information. And then we have these two, that the self-attention, multi-headed self-attention layers. These are the things that handle what the system pays attention to, like gets inputs. So it's both in the encoder and decoder, gets inputs and then like decides what to pay attention to, like decides what inputs go through, right? And that's really the heart of like transformer architecture. Then content addressable. So you can see this VKQ. VKQ is just value queue queries, and this is how the system uses to query memories or query information or retrieval process. So you use value queue, Q pairs, the key values. Then I'm not sure about Hebbian learning in this architecture, but the one other architecture which is interesting is Hopfield networks. So Hopfield networks is a Hebbian, like, because you can see it's a network, like, which means we suggest that there is Hebbian learning going through like the strengthening of long term potentiation process of learning going through. And then it's also like an energy based learning. So like it's a fine tuning. Like, so the learning process happens through fine tuning energy to as low as possible. And so like the whole network is a process of controlling that energy of learning. It relates to another version of this network, which is a more advanced that uses probabilistic method called Boltzmann machine. So it's Boltzmann machine is like a high level of Hopfield networks, which is a probabilistic kind of system, which means that instead of using energy to learn, you use a probabilistic distribution of what the system needs to learn, like you query from that probability distribution. And so we can, so this is like what AI systems is doing to implement what biological evolution has taught us. And now to the important question is, how computable is it? So can we use other systems of computations, like systems that are based on rules, for example, Turing machines and cellular automata? And I think the answer is yes, we can use such systems. And I'll talk about the current models that uses such systems, and some of the work that I've done with Turing machines, and it relates to biological evolution. So this idea of evolving systems, not just writing code, but evolving systems and seeing what the system does. So Stephen Wolfram has done some work on this using cellular automata on adaptive evolution, where you change what we call the genotype of the system, or the rules of the system, to random point mutation of the system. So you change a specific random point in the rules and see how evolve the system and see how many steps it evolves to. And the steps it evolves to is what we call the lifetime of the system. So the longest system, the longest lifetime. So if a system evolves longer than any other system, then that system essentially goes to the next steps of evolution. So you take that to the next generation. Keep doing that and finding different ways of like different patterns. So you can see that you start from a dot, change the genome, and then evolve that system step by step, and then you get, at the end of the day, you get these complicated structures that emerge from just like doing single point mutation, which is interesting because if you think about how evolution of such system, what kind of structures we can get from just evolving systems, then you will like, there are many ways you can like find rules that mimic or what nature does, right? Like they're exactly the same as how nature does, and Turing machines and cellular automata are the simple systems that can help in doing that. And I did some work on that using Turing machines. So this is like an analog of what Stephen did. So my work was more like using Turing machines, but doing the same thing and changing one point in the rules and evolving that system. And you can see that, so this is like a system evolving from this single point. So the two, you look at these two, this is like the whole state. So for example, if this is the initial point, so my idea was like setting, which was a suggestion by Eric Parfait, which like set the rules to a whole state, every other rule to be a whole state, then keep changing that and evolving the system, and you get like this complicated structure, not so complicated, but it's somehow it shows that evolution works, right? Even for simple programs.
Yeah, that's interesting
I worked
because
on that.
so the halting state here, like state 2 seeing black lead is the halting state, right? And the halting state here is always the same for all of these. it looks like.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but like you change the rules in between so as to have more complicated or and longer lasting behavior. Um, and it's like there's this basic idea of you could start seeing it in like the middle one, um, that it's just kind of like goes and then goes left and right, then left again, then
Mm.
it makes these two sort of
Yeah, I think the head is not visible because of the black, yeah, but the black
I can see the
background. But
outline.
yeah, so it does. Yeah. So yeah, that's right. So you just keep changing the rules and then evolving that and counting the lifetime.
I like that
Yeah,
both
I can
these
show like,
examples, like the CA, it's like it kind of has this shape curving to the right, leaning to the right, and it kind of develops that idea like in a more refined process. And the same thing for this Turing machine, like it has a definite shape of the path that the Turing machine head takes, and it just kind of gets more nuanced. Some details are added, but the overall structure, like it's the same idea throughout. I really like that.
yes. Yeah, so yeah, I can like uh talk about like what I did. So this is like an example of what the evolution does. So we have a rule. So we have two. These are like example of two Turing machines: two-step, two-color, three-step, two-color, four-state. So state, four-state, three-color, and then so the rule of Turing machines is what we call the genotype of the system of the Turing machine, and the results of using those rules is what we call the phenotype. So you keep changing the rules and seeing what the results are. So, so the idea is you take a section of that rule, which means so the right side, right hand side is encoding the state and the color, and the left hand side state and color, and then the right hand side encodes the new state, new color, and the direction of the head. So the idea is to keep changing the right hand side of the rules, keep change it based on like the state, the number of state. If it's two state, then you just change from one and two. You keep changing one and two. And if the same for three state and the rest. And the color side will change 0, 1. So if it's a two state, then you keep playing between 0, 0 and 1. Three state, 0 and 1, 2. So you keep doing that. The direction is so we have only three directions. I mean, two directions, but 0 counts as a direction, but it's just staying in the same spot, right? It doesn't go anywhere, right? So the single point mutation is take a rule, parent rule, make children out of that rule. So these are like children based on like single point mutation. You mutate 1 point from those children, and then evolve the children in parallel. And the one that gets to a lifetime that is higher than the rest, that becomes the parent, right? That becomes like the the one that will be evolved in the next step of evolution. So you keep doing that until you have like an entire system that has lived long enough, right? And the next slide shows how this lifetime selection happens. So this is like these are examples, not real values. If I run this system, these rules, I will not get the same real values. They all just go to infinity, but these are values. So as you can see, evolution. So this lifetime represent how many steps the system has lived. So, and depending on which one lived longer, you get a list of those and then get the maximum of that list. And the maximum, you get that genotype of that maximum. And that is what you'll be using in the next evolution. So you'd keep doing that, and then what you have at the end of the day is a system. But the goal of the evolution is not really just to evolve the system, but it's to find systems that are interesting to us. So systems that we can do things with. And this evolution step is important because one way what I'm thinking about is if I can evolve systems, then essentially what I'll do is I'll get rules that will help me in my current work. So my current work involves the idea of probabilistic Turing machines, probability Turing machine switch. So this is like I got impressed by how the gene, the CREB gene works and how it turns on and off memory, remember or forget. So if is there like a Turing machine that can effectively implement a molecular switch like this one to control what a system pays attention to? So if you run a system like a Turing machine based on different probability distribution, then you decide whether if it goes right, then right would, I can encode right to represent on, right? Then left to represent off, right? So I can do that, then encode that in the system, and the probability part of the system will just help me decide whether to go right or left, right? So if I do that, then the goal is now to just see how we can implement such a system using Turing machine. I know you can as well do that in the game of life, which I think there are so many switch like structures in the game of life, like the blinker might act like a switch, for example. But I'm interested in Turing machine because of how the idea of Turing machine running infinitely, like the halting problem is a barrier, but then it might be just if you know a system never halts, then you can use that Turing machine to control how the system learns throughout the time. So you just keep controlling what the system learns until an infinite amount of time and evolving it throughout the time. So that's the idea that I'm exploring right now. And I'm using the idea of adaptive evolution to search for rules that can effectively implement that.
So that's interesting.
And
I guess the idea of a probabilistic Turing machine, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the first thing that comes to my mind is you have all these transition rules, right? So, you see you're in a particular state and you see a particular color and you do this single action as a response to that stimulus. But if you wanted to open that up to like a probabilistic thing, then you say like, okay, well, I'm in this state, I see this color at the tape head, and then I have like a 50-50 split of this transition versus that transition. And you can change that 50-50 weighting, and so you can have this like probabilistic statement, right? And then encode all those probabilities, all the every state transition has like multiple transitions out of it for each, pattern recognition. And those one or two or more state transitions like have a probability weighting, so you can change what those branches are and what the weightings on those branches are.
yeah, you assign to each state. Those numbers, you assign a probability to them.
Okay.
More like how the Boltzmann machine works. So the Boltzmann just assigns probabilities to, like, as an energy kind of way, so that the highest probability takes precedence, right? So if you have a state of a Turing machine, then you assign probabilities to the values, then you can decide what to do with the system, what the system does. But I think what the system does should just be, I mean, the probability of the value should just be encoded in what the system does, right? It could be random. It could be, I don't know, random stock. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's something that I want to explore.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes, and finally, and I think what is being done currently and the future is the idea of emergent models. And, it's something that I'm really curious about, and it's a project that is being done by Giacomo and Nicola, and it's in accordance with the Wolfram Institute in Brightstar. It's something I'm curious about, and to see what comes out of this. The idea that we can use there's new kinds of models or machine learning models that are can be used in place of neural networks. So what they are is they are dynamical systems. Like they use ideas inspired by cellular automata. If you think about cellular automata and how the system is they are dynamic in nature, and this dynamic nature is encoded in the roles themselves. So, and Turing machines as well. So what they are not is they're not neural networks per se, but I think if it works, then I think, I mean, it works currently, but I think if you can, neural networks as well can be also encoded in the system, which currently is not. But if that's the path of it could take, then there should be, it's a better way of building neural networks or machine learning models. And so the idea of memory in this system is interesting in how they keep processing or playing with memory is interesting, because what they do is keep the system themselves keep an unbounded memory. So memory is not like it's bound to something. It's the system itself. It has memory within it itself. All right, like if you have a Turing machine tape, then that will represent memory in itself. So as the system transitions from or explores this memory palace, or transition from one state to another, then that is a form of like exploring memory, right? So it's a very interesting concept, I think, and I think Giacomo will be there are talks about these, and I've included links that describe what the system does, and it's a very interesting concept, and I think you should check it out. And
Yeah.
so that is my
the bright star in this sort of
question.
I was just commenting on this emergent model, sort of, because with neural nets, it's like you have this input activation on one layer, and then it goes through neurons in between layers of neurons, and then you have like feature extraction, or some sort of result on the far end. And here it's like instead of using layers of neurons, it's using a grid of cells, sort of a cellular automata, to percolate and extract and filter and sort of compute on that information as it moves through the substrate, and then ends up with feature detectors on the far end. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think yeah, that's accurate, and I mean it's somehow, but
Yeah.
I think the
Giacomo,
Yes.
is that true?
Giacomo would be the right guy
Yes,
to comment
I,
on.
I have one thing to say. Yeah, this is accurate. The thing that I want to connect with the idea of memory is that like normally we think memory like an external things. Like you think as, for example, a disk in your PC where memory is stored, and there is a CPU that reads or writes on this disk. Instead, what emergent models do, and in general cellular automatas, they keep memory in the latent space, so they have no separation between computation and memory. And this is a cool thing because you can see that memory is an active thing. It's not only a thing that stores information, but memory computes in some way. And the cool thing about emergent models is that like the way they work depends entirely on the initial memory state. And by changing this initial memory state, you can tweak the model to represent any possible function if the system is Turing complete, like if you use a Turing complete rule of a cellular automata. And yeah, this is a very interesting thing because we don't need actually to change the way the connections between the cells are wired. You keep it fixed. You just change the state at the first instant of time. And this initial memory drives how the system evolves and how it represents information flow.
Yeah, and the idea of evolution is also included in the system, right? And yeah, you can evolve the system through like also the training mechanism, which uses genetic algorithms, is also an interesting thing to that the system uses.
Yeah, because like you don't know in advance what is the initial memory that drives to a certain result. You have to search it with genetic algorithms. We found that is very more efficient, a lot more efficient than simply doing a random search. And since the system is kind of a black box, you don't know the rule of how to program a cellular automata. In theory, one could learn it, but I think it's quite complex. We want the system to learn by itself and to evolve in such a way that learns things.
Well, awesome. So this is very interesting line of work, and I'll encourage people to check it out. And that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Brian.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
Sure.
Giacomo.
Thank you. And my question is, like, before we saw about the biological neurons and biological neural networks and how memory can be arranged and how our brain arranged in such a way to store and retrieve memories. By conducting my research on emergent models, I find an interesting thing that you can have two types of memory. One kind of memory that is encoded in the architecture. So it's kind of, if you think biological brain, it's the way neurons are connected to each other. Like the weights of the synapses can carry some amount of memory. But also the other thing that can carry memory is activation. So for example, thinking of biological neurons, like you think a network of neurons, they can build circuits and they can flow informations inside these circuits. And this information like can live in this latent space, even without being coded into the synapses. Like, for example, it's special patterns of kind of periodical waves can happen, and these periodical waves store a kind of memory information. In your opinion, and from your point of view, is our memory more determined by hardwire connections or by latent states?
Yeah, so the idea of engram comes to mind because of it's the hardwiring of memory in the pattern of the engram. So I think to answer that, I think it's more like a hardwired pattern-like structure. So if a system has a specific pattern presented to it, or if a system or two neurons connected to each other from a specific pattern, that is more like the memory that is encoded in that connection. So yeah, I think it's more like wiring of the neurons of the system.
Right. So I guess like an engram, like a particular set of neurons whose goal is to fire together. Their interstitial uh, synapses are like strengthened to so that when one fires, they all fire together. Or when one part starts firing, then the rest like come online and get the whole pattern coming out.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So yeah,
Yeah, and the cool
sorry.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, so it's I was going to say like it's more like a wiring phenomena.
Okay, thank you. And the cool thing about this, it's like the learning rules, like Hebbian learning, are local. So you kind of have the neuron I and the neuron J that they are connected, and the way the connection updates in time depends on the two neurons. So it's kind of there is not a global rule that drives like backpropagation, but it's a kind of local rule. And this is very interesting. Like, of course, there are more complex behaviors. Like Hebbian learning is not enough to explain everything that happens in our brain. But the cool thing is that the internal state, like the activations, so the latent states, can modify the architecture. And this is a very cool thing. Like a firing of a neuron can modify how the neurons are wired.
What do you mean? How the neurons are wired? Like the weights and the activations?
Yeah, the activation determines a change on weights. It's kind of what I was saying.
So like the strength of firing determines how they'll be wired together.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I was just
So
saying this. Yeah.
okay. So yeah, I think I don't know if there are any more questions, but I think this is it.
Yeah, definitely. A lot to take in. Very good presentation. A lot of ideas, especially like for me. Like now, I'm really curious about probabilistic Turing machines and probabilistic cellular automata, and kind of want to like.
Yeah, there are.
Got a lot of
They are
ideas.
good. I think. I don't know if the quantum framework works on like there's a quantum Turing machine which kind of implements a probabilistic nature of Turing machines, but I'm not sure if that's being worked on or it's also in the quantum framework.
Yeah, I guess like a quantum Turing machine would, instead of zeros and ones on the tape head or discrete scalar values, you're then talking about discrete values on a block sphere or a spin state being like a three-dimensional vector on a sphere.
Right.
And then there's sort of quantum and the talking about quantum in the sense of having a probability distribution of what happens next.
Yeah. Okay, so
James, do you have any
yeah, I think,
thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I just had one comment about that last statement you're making regarding the firing of a neuron like changes its weights, but in biological systems it can go either way, because if it's a negative association that you have with that firing, then theoretically the feedback loop is to reduce that that thing from happening again. So if there's a specific neural pathway that causes a negative outcome that you'd like not to happen again, then theoretically the feedback loop should be able to adjust for either like positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And I'm not sure to what degree is this still something that needs to be studied. Like, do we not really know that in detail how that works, or is it pretty well established how that works with regards to like neurotransmitters, serotonin, and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think it's already established because I think systems are already incorporating such kind of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, like in the neural network case, it's very simply tied to the loss function. So just depending on the loss, you're either increasing or decreasing the parameters of the neural network.
But
Yeah.
so the positive and negative is kind of a reinforcement learning strategy, which I think is
Exactly.
also
So how does that relate to that final statement you're making just now, where you were saying that the firing of the neuron, yeah, it changes the weights. I guess it could change it to be higher or lower. It could go either way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can encode the strength in terms of weights. So as it fires more, then weights go up for the connection between those. So think about if you have a Hopfield network, right? So the weights are kind of what controls between what each neuron's connection. So if you encode the strength of each connection, then you get the weights as the encoding scheme for that. So if you go positive, then it gets stronger. The connection becomes stronger. Then lower the values are. I think
But it's still firing.
value of
You see what I'm saying? So even though it's still firing, it's not always positive. But is that because of the feature of that specific Hopfield network that's different to a neural network, or?
Yeah, I think it's specific to Hopfield network, the Hebbian kind of learning specific to Hopfield network, and I think the idea of a neuron, it has lower strength, with lower weight, but at the end of the day, it's still firing, but you cannot detect the firing forces because it's so weak that those neurons are not activated because of their weakness, right? So you keep focusing on the neurons that only fires, right? So yeah, it's true that they keep firing as even if they are like really weak.
Okay, I see. That's interesting.
Yeah, I just sent in the chat a small thing about short STDP, that is spike timing dependence plasticity. So it's kind of the timing between the spikes, like the presynaptic and the postsynaptic, determines, like, as far as we know, it's a simplification, obviously, determines if the connection gets stronger or weaker between two neurons, and so it can both go a positive delta or a negative to the connection, like it can increase or decrease depending on the timing. And
that's interesting. So interstitial weights between neurons can happen like at that location, whereas like in neural nets, backpropagation is sort of tracing back the influence from the loss function over at the outputs and like tweaking the weights to optimize for that long range effect. But in biology, like the neurons are like working together to determine the weights between them. Is that accurate?
yeah, exactly. Neurons can organize in such a way that they modulate states, and this determines changes on the connections. And like, I think I'm not sure about this, but theoretically it holds that by arranging neurons in such a way on the initial conditions, you can make them be able to change the connection by arranging complex interaction between them. They can arrange depressions and potentiation of particular connection in response to events and implement inside some learning algorithms that are local and that are not kind of predetermined by an external source, but are, yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting.
All right.
I don't know if you want to bring that image up on the screen or if you were looking at it on the recording, Dugan.
Yeah, I brought it up on the
Okay,
on the stream here.
very cool. Yeah, maybe we could share that paper as well, Giacomo, for the description in case people want to research that more. But this is very cool, Brian. Thanks for doing the presentation for us.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who's tuning in for the live stream. And we'll be back tomorrow with Damaris Krober talking about